I am glad to introduce Dr. Greta Massetti, who is here to tell us about her career path for the APS SSCP How Did I Get Here video series. Dr. Massetti received her Ph.D. in clinical psychology from SUNY Stony Brook in 2002. After graduate school, she spent 5 years on the faculty in the Department of Psychology at SUNY Buffalo, then moved to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention as a scientist in 2007. Dr. Massetti has had several roles at the CDC, including senior scientist and branch chief. She is currently the Associate Director for Science in the Division of Cancer Prevention and Control, where she is responsible for providing leadership and direction on the division's cancer prevention and control science activities, and for promoting the division's cancer prevention and control agenda. Dr. Massetti's research focuses on contextual factors affecting youth development and community health, and evidence-based approaches to public health. Dr. Massetti, please describe your career path and tell us about any obstacles or barriers that you overcame along the way. In addition, tell us what has surprised you about your job and what you wish you had known earlier about this type of position.
Well, hello, thank you. I'd be happy to answer those questions. But first, thank you so much for inviting me to participate and to SSCP for hosting. I think it's a great series. I think my career path, looking back, it sounds like it tells a particular story, but, as a lot of people who are mid-career or advanced career will tell you that oftentimes things happen along the way that are surprising. And I think that's definitely true of my career path. I started in graduate school at SUNY Stony Brook. I think they're now called Stony Brook University, but they'll always be SUNY Stony Brook to me. And I chose that particular graduate school for a couple of reasons. One was I was really looking for a strong research emphasis, and the other is that I was really interested in evidence-based treatments and behavioral treatments, and Stony Brook was really had been at the forefront for decades of developing behavioral treatments and testing treatments and thinking through this clinical science model. And that's exactly what we did, and I feel like I got a tremendous research training, and particularly it wasn't just the research that we did, it was also the training and research methodology. I feel like the emphasis on knowing how to develop a good research question and then how to develop a method and design that matches that question was exactly what has followed me throughout my career and has been the greatest strength, that the foundation that I rely on at every step in my career. We also had some fantastic faculty, Dan Klein and Dan O'Leary and Sue O'Leary and Ted Carr, that, I remember being in classes and having them walk us through these discussions that were really about how to ask questions and how to do research. The other piece was that I did work when I was in graduate school with Russ Whitehurst, and we did work on preschoolers from low-income environments, because that was a real interest of mine, was children growing up in poverty and what that meant for families. When I was on internship, I went to the University of Chicago, again, because I wanted that research and practice combination, and that was exactly what we got. It was a real moment of living the life and walking the walk of saying, what does clinical science look like in a clinic setting? We had fantastic, brilliant research minds who were putting their data to work in clinics to really help children and families. The other thing about Chicago is that the university is on the south side. It's in a fairly well-to-do bubble, but it's surrounded by extreme poverty and extreme inner city. So that was also a really important component for me. It was to understand how can psychology help, and how can research help those communities, and what are the services that can be provided. At the time when I was coming out of grad school was similar to today, in that it was very difficult it's very difficult to compete for academic jobs straight out of grad school. There are a lot of people who are applying on the job market with postdocs, sometimes in multiple postdocs. So I kind of knew that I probably, even though I really was interested in an academic position, I knew that I needed to do something kind of in the interim. And I applied for a few postdocs, and I was kind of considering options, and I ended up selecting a position at SUNY Buffalo to work with Bill Pelham, because it was not a true postdoc, it was a soft money position. So there was the possibility of extending kind of beyond the couple of years that most postdocs do. And I thought it was a good option to have more permanence. It was a great experience. So I started out, my first 2 years there were fully soft money. And we ran a clinic for kids with ADHD and disruptive behavior problems. And it was, again, very much a clinical science model. We developed and tested evidence-based programs. We did research. We had a summer treatment program that was kind of the component of most of our research work. And a lot of my job was to kind of expand and translate the clinic-based, evidence-based programs to school settings, particularly Buffalo City, inner city schools. So it was really kind of about combining my interest in evidence-based interventions and my interest in kids in poverty, and saying, how do we push out what's happening in clinics into kind of more applied settings with schools. After a couple of years, I transitioned to the psychology department. I was in the clinical area at SUNY Buffalo, and that was also a really good experience. There's some great folks there who I think a lot of my colleagues are still at SUNY Buffalo. It's just a brilliant, really nice environment, very collegial. So things were going along well, with the one hitch that I was in Buffalo. My husband's a musician, and we kind of made a go of living in Buffalo, but it was not really a viable career setting for him. So we were thinking through kind of what might happen long term. We'd started a family. I was relatively happy in Buffalo, and I wasn't necessarily on the job market or looking for a new position, but when I was in Buffalo, I was the co-PI along with Bill on a grant from the Institute of Education Sciences that was partly co-funded by CDC. And I didn't know anything about CDC, and the study was a large multi-site trial, so we were one site. And through that project, I got to know the CDC scientists that were working on the project quite well. And I was just kind of really blown away by their role on the project. They were in charge of the design of the multi-site component and measurement and kind of coordinating all of these multiple moving parts. And I really loved their role in the projects. I thought that was really a cool thing to do. And I particularly befriended a woman named Tamara Hagrick, who's a colleague of mine. And after a couple of years, she sent out kind of an announcement, hey, CDC is hiring. Do you guys have any postdocs or anybody who'd be interested in applying? And so I thought, well, I'm not on the job market, but why not? And I wanted to really kind of explore it and see what the option was. And, the key thing about coming to CDC for me was I had a very research-focused career, and I was really interested in continuing that. I was thinking, well, I've always been an academic, and I've always wanted to be an academic, and so I have my dream job now, so why am I rocking the boat? So I really wanted to make sure that the kinds of things that I enjoyed doing, which is working with data and publishing and doing research, were going to be a key component of the job. So I really thought that through carefully, and when I visited, I really was blown away by the brilliant minds at CDC. So that's the transition I made. I first came to CDC and I worked in the Division of Violence Prevention. I did a lot of work in violence, youth violence and sexual violence and child abuse primarily. And I was there for a few years. I was a branch chief most recently. And after a few years, my career progressed, and as a branch chief, it's a fairly senior leadership position. So I didn't really get to touch research as much as I had wanted to, or as I had in the early days when I was at CDC. So that's kind of where I decided I would take kind of a leap of faith and do something a little different. And so now I'm an associate director for science. I'm for the Division of Cancer Prevention and Control, which means I'm kind of the lead scientific authority in cancer at CDC. And that's kind of a really cool job. I get to kind of oversee a lot of the science. We have about, I think it's about 180 staff in our division. About 3/4 of whom are scientists or epidemiologists or medical officers. So a lot of my job is about kind of not just kind of the science, how it's conducted, and making sure that our science kind of aligns with kind of the best practices, the best use of methodology, but it's also about translating that science to the public, right? So what is the data and what does science say about evidence-based preventive strategies for cancer? What should people be doing to protect themselves? Kind of, if a study comes out, what does it mean for me? What does it mean for my mom, for my grandmother, for my community? So those kinds of things. You know, some of the unique things about CDC are that, you know, we get those opportunities to really translate our work, oftentimes for the public, sometimes beyond that. I've had lots of experiences working with the White House or working with policymakers doing Hill briefings because a congressman is interested in what we're doing. Sometimes they're happy about it. Sometimes they're very angry, and we have to go calm them down because they think CDC should be doing something different than what we're doing. But I really enjoy that aspect. I enjoy kind of saying, well, here's the scientific way of saying this, but how do I communicate it to somebody who basically does not have a science background? I find that really fun and exciting. We also get to play with really fantastic, huge, state-of-the-art data sets. So a lot of our research is really embedded in really great public health data. Some of the obstacles that I've overcome in my path, I think there's a couple. One is that regardless of where you are, I think it's true that early career, those first 2, 3, 4 years are really rough, really very rough. And no amount of preparation can really prepare people for that anxiety and that feeling like, what, I don't really know what I'm doing. They just like spat me out of grad school. And even though I felt like I know I'm a competent person, it really was a moment of questioning kind of what I did. So I think my department did a good job of doing what they could to mentor young early career people, but I think as a field, there's many opportunities for us to think through what are some innovative models to provide that kind of mentoring and support that people need. The other major obstacle has been the fact that I'm a pretty good writer, but scientific writing takes a real unique skill and it takes a tremendous amount of practice. And in my early days of writing, I really, really struggled with it. And it's the kind of thing where it's punishing because you don't get a lot of rewards. So I think there were lots of moments when I almost gave up and I almost said, maybe I just need to go have a practice career. But I really stuck with it, and I found that it is really the chipping away at that skill that kind of makes it come really easily. And and working with people who are really good at writing and kind of putting brilliant thoughts onto paper, that I really learned a lot from kind of working and collaborating with folks and writing with folks where we could keep each other accountable. Things that have surprised me about the job, my particular job now, I talked about the translation of science to the public and policy. I mean, I just really have found that I don't know that I had no training in communications and health communications or health marketing, but I think I have a pretty good mind for it. And so that was surprising to me that would be something that I really enjoyed and that I liked. And really the kind of myriad opportunities. A few years ago, I was involved in a project that ended up spinning into advising Hillary Clinton when she was Secretary of State on work she was doing with the UN on a UN resolution for women's health. That was really cool, and we got to do some really cool stuff there that I feel like had international implications that would never have come my way if I didn't have this position. So what do I wish I'd known earlier or in grad school? I think I mean, I talked a little bit about how the emphasis of training on research methods, and I think those are great experiences. The more people can take the opportunity to really understand research methods, a big component of my job is that I do what's called clearance, which means that anything that is written by one of the scientists in our division, I have to review and approve it. If it's a paper, it's an abstract that's submitted for a conference, it's a chapter, I have to make sure that their science is sound. And I don't have a background in cancer. I've come up to speed in the last couple of years, but I think it is because I understand methods and I understand measurement and I understand statistics that I can kind of translate my expertise across topics and say, is this fundamentally a good research question and a good design? Are they interpreting the findings in the right way or going beyond the data and all of those kinds of things? I think this thing about communicating health information, communicating scientific information is becoming not just an interesting thing, but it's going to be a requirement of scientists. So if people are in graduate school now, the public, the media, the world is being bombarded with all kinds of science, some of which is not very good science. So I think there's movement among a lot of professional organizations to provide support to scientists to learn, how do you talk about your science? If you publish a paper and the New York Times calls you up and wants to talk to you about it, don't panic. How do you talk about it effectively? There's trainings that people offer. One of them is that's very well known. It's very well done is at Stony Brook. It's called the Alnalda Center for Communication or Science Communication, something like that. They offer trainings for trainees and early career scientists. And there's a number of them across the world that I think are great opportunities. So people kind of get comfortable with this idea that if your Aunt Edith says, tell me what you're working on, that you can answer that question and she'll say, oh, I totally get that. I know why that's important. And that can be done for any type of science. So those are really great experiences. The other thing I would add is, especially the more early career you are, take any opportunity to learn, even if it means that maybe your job on a particular project or your role or your task is fairly menial, because there's so much more that you will absorb compared to what you put into it, right? So having that level of humility and saying, you know what, if I have the opportunity to learn from this person and all they need for me to do is to format the references for a paper, that's already a great starting point. And I feel like that's where I've learned a lot along the way, is being willing to, I'll just take notes at the meeting, and then, I'm exposed to so much more just through that opportunity to just be a part of something or be a fly on the wall. And I think sometimes students kind of lose track of that, and they feel like, well, if I'm not going to be first author on something, or if I'm not going to be the lead on something, then I don't know, what's the point? And I think there's something to be, at that point, there's so much more to be gained by just little contributions, and that's oftentimes what people who are more senior need, is people who are willing to kind of carry the water. So I think that is all of my questions. I wanted to thank you again for having me, and I look forward to any other opportunities to speak with people about career paths.
Dr. Massetti, thank you so much for taking the time today to tell us about your career path. We so appreciate your time.
Thank you.